Welcome to Propeller Breeze, the show for student pilots, sim fans, and everyone chasing that first solo and beyond. All information in this podcast is for entertainment and general knowledge only. Always verify with certified flight instructors or regulatory authorities before attempting anything mentioned here.
Picture this. You're sitting in the left seat of the cockpit. You have your hand resting on the throttle. You're looking out through the plexiglass at the runway center line, and you are just entirely ready to fly.
Yeah, the absolute best feeling in the world.
Right. But before that propeller even makes its very first rotation, there is this incredibly dense, like invisible web of rules, acronyms, and safety nets completely surrounding your aircraft. You're basically sitting at the center of a massive legal matrix.
You really are. And I think, for someone actively training for their private pilot license, that invisible web often feels significantly more intimidating than the actual physics of making the airplane leave the ground.
Oh, totally.
Because we conceptualize flying as this ultimate expression of individual freedom, right? You pull back the yoke and you just leave the earth behind.
Just you and the clouds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that freedom only exists because it's built on top of a highly structured, basically unyielding system. What you are interacting with the moment you turn the battery master switch on is essentially the operating system of the sky.
The operating system of the sky. I like that. So for this deep dive, our mission is to basically decode that massive stack of FAA regulatory standards and resources specifically for you, the student pilot.
Yeah, because we want to transform that intimidating alphabet soup into a really clear, actionable roadmap for your PHAK-CH1 journey.
Exactly. So let's unpack the bedrock of that operating system.
Yeah.
Because long before a student pilot worries about, say, a specific weather briefing or a local runway closure, they are operating under the absolute law of the land.
The big one.
The big one, the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR.
Right, and the CFR is this master codification of every rule made by the executive departments and agencies of the federal government. I mean, it is divided into 50 different titles covering literally everything from agriculture to highways.
It's massive.
It's huge. But for the aviation world, our entire universe is contained within Title 14.
Aeronautics and space.
That's the one.
But, even Title 14 alone is just gigantically overwhelming. It covers everything from launching commercial rockets to the certification of those massive transport category jets.
Which a student pilot really does not need to digest.
No, definitely not. Thankfully, there are 3 core parts of Title 14 that dictate your existence as a student pilot. And those are Part 61, Part 91, and Part 43.
Right. And understanding the philosophy behind how those 3 parts are separated is kind of the key to making sense of the regulations. So Part 61 is entirely focused on the human element.
Okay, the human element.
Yeah. It dictates the eligibility, the aeronautical knowledge, flight proficiency, and the training requirements for each specific type of pilot certificate. So it establishes the baseline for what makes a person legally competent to operate an aircraft.
So if Title 14 is the entire universe of transportation law, Part 61 is kind of like the driver's education standard.
I think that's a great way to put it, yeah.
It defines the human software, basically, required to operate the hardware.
Exactly. Which leads directly into Part 91. And Part 91 defines the operational environment.
The rules of the road.
Precisely. It provides the general operating and flight rules. It dictates the behavioral parameters for both visual flight rules and instrument flight rules.
So once Part 61 certifies that you're actually capable of flying, Part 91 jumps in and dictates exactly how you must behave while you're up there in the National Airspace System.
Right. And then that leaves Part 43, which deals with the machine itself.
The hardware.
The hardware. Maintenance, preventive maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. And this goes far beyond just, popping the hood to check the oil.
Yeah, I imagine they're pretty strict about who can actually take a wrench to an airplane.
Extremely. Part 43 establishes a very strict chain of custody for the physical integrity of the aircraft. It dictates who is legally allowed to do the work, how that work absolutely must be documented, and what specific standard the aircraft has to meet to be deemed legally airworthy before you ever step foot inside it.
Wow. Okay, so we've got the rules, but a law is basically just ink on paper without an infrastructure to actually enforce it, right?
Right, you need the referees.
Exactly. And that infrastructure is the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. But to really grasp how the FAA operates, you kind of have to look beyond their headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, D.C. is where the high-level policy is drafted, but the actual physiological heartbeat of the National Airspace System exists in 2 massive field facilities.
Right. The sources detail these really well. The first one is the Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center, or the MMAC, which is located in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, Oklahoma City.
And this facility basically acts as the central hub for the human and logistical elements of the FAA.
Yeah.
Right. It's where they train their personnel, manage all the airman certification records, and basically handle this immense logistical supply chain that keeps the airspace functioning.
It's a huge operation. And then on the other side of the country, you have their technological counterpart on the East Coast, the William J. Hughes Technical Center.
Oh, in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Right. And this is the premier aviation research, development, test, and evaluation facility in the country. They aren't just maintaining the current systems there, they are literally writing the code for the future.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, they test the complex algorithms for next-generation air traffic control software, satellite navigation integration, advanced communication networks. Basically, before a new piece of infrastructure goes live in the national airspace, it gets broken down and thoroughly evaluated in Atlantic City.
That's wild. So Washington writes the policy, Oklahoma City trains the people, and Atlantic City builds the tech.
Exactly.
But, you know, if you're a student pilot and you have a question about your medical certificate, or if a local flight school needs to certify a new simulator, they aren't calling any of those big national hubs, are they?
No, definitely not. You'd be on hold for days. You bypass the national hubs entirely, and you interact with your local flight standards district office.
The FSPO.
The FSDO. There are roughly 80 of these distributed strategically across the United States. Yeah, about 80. Because aviation is this massive federal system, sure, but the actual execution of flying is inherently local.
That makes total sense.
Right, so the Flight Standards Service relies on these district offices to be the public interface. They handle certification, surveillance, and enforcement right in your specific geographical area. They oversee your local flight schools, evaluate the air taxi operators, and step in immediately if there is a local accident or, an enforcement action.
So this decentralized approach puts the oversight exactly where the action is actually happening. And the people executing that oversight out there on the tarmac are the aviation safety inspectors, the ASIs.
Yeah.
The FAA employs roughly 3,700 of these inspectors.
And these individuals are highly trained professionals. They undergo rigorous standardization back at the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City.
Right.
And they usually specialize in operations, maintenance, or avionics. So when an ASI conducts an evaluation or an inspection, they're assessing how well the pilot, the procedures, and the specific aircraft all integrate into a safe operational unit. Like you said earlier, they're the definitive referees of the sky.
Well, what's fascinating is the sources actually reveal this huge evolution in how those referees operate. Historically, aviation safety relied heavily on a reactive policing model.
Yeah, very reactive.
Like you find a broken rule or broken part and you issue a penalty or a fix.
Yeah.
But the FAA's approach has fundamentally shifted with the transition from the old aviation safety program, the ASP, to what they use now, the modern FAASTeam.
And the retirement of the old aviation safety program is just a perfect case study in how systems mature.
This blew my mind.
Right.
Because the source says the old aviation safety program was actually shut down because it was too successful. I mean, you never hear about a government program getting shut down for working too well. It was too successful at fixing the easy accident causes. So what does an elusive accident cause look like now?
Well, the ASP successfully fulfilled its original mandate. Through aggressive education and outreach, they largely mitigated what the FAA categorizes as those easy-to-fix causes.
By easy to fix, we're talking about like mechanical failures or fundamental repeated operational errors. Things you can solve with a hardware update or a mandatory training bulletin.
Precisely. The industry just became incredibly proficient at engineering out mechanical failures. But solving all that low-hanging fruit basically exposed a much deeper, much more complex layer of risk.
I see.
So to push safety margins even further, the Flight Standards Service formed the FAASTeam to target these elusive accident causes.
And an elusive accident cause requires a completely different approach.
Completely different. You're dealing with deeply embedded human factors here.
Like the normalization of deviance.
Yes. Where a pilot slowly gets used to, cutting corners during a pre-flight inspection until it just becomes a dangerous habit, or the psychology of get-there-itis.
Oh, get-there-itis.
Yeah.
Where external pressure causes a pilot to fly into deteriorating weather against their better judgment.
Right. And you can't issue a mechanical recall for a pilot's cognitive bias. You just can't police your way out of a human factors problem. You have to cultivate a culture that actively resists those biases.
So the FAASTeam partners with individuals, flight schools, and the broader industry to create this proactive safety culture.
Exactly. They analyze data to identify these really subtle trends, like maybe a slight increase in runway incursions at a specific type of intersection, and they deploy targeted educational interventions before those trends result in bent metal.
But moving that cultural shift forward requires an incredibly fast pipeline for information. The sources point to the 2004 launch of SPANS, the Safety Program Airman Notification System, which is a critical turning point.
Huge turning point. Prior to SPANS, alerting pilots to safety seminars or localized educational events relied on a paper-based mailing system.
You're kidding? Snail mail.
Literal snail mail. And in a dynamic aviation environment, relying on physical mail is glacially slow, not to mention financially inefficient. So SPANS digitized this entire process, moving all the notifications to a centralized online platform.
I mean, it sounds like a basic administrative update to us today, but the implications back then had to be huge.
Massive. It drastically reduced the latency between the FAA identifying an elusive safety trend and the local pilot population actually receiving the training to mitigate it.
Right, because now any airman can just log in, see exactly what safety briefings are happening in their region, and register instantly.
Yeah, that speed of information transfer is critical. And it really mirrors the transition a student pilot has to make when managing their own aviation knowledge. You have to balance static foundational knowledge with dynamic, real-time data.
Which perfectly transitions us to the actual books and manuals you need to keep in your flight bag.
The pilot's bookshelf.
The bookshelf. The foundation of that physical knowledge base is the AM, the Aeronautical Information Manual. This is the definitive guide to basic flight information and ATC procedures.
It provides the standardized language of the sky.
Right, detailing everything from pilot controller glossaries to critical medical facts regarding spatial disorientation. So the AIM is the universal baseline.
It is. But the document sitting right next to it in the cockpit is entirely unique, and that's the Pilot Operating Handbook, or POH.
And this is important because a really common misconception among student pilots is that the POH is similar to, like, the owner's manual of a car.
Right, like a generic booklet printed for every Cessna 172 or Piper Cherokee of a certain model year.
But the reality of the POH highlights the strict legal framework of Part 43 we discussed earlier. A generic manual just cannot account for the specific life history of an individual aircraft. An approved POH is bound to the exact serial number of the airframe.
Yes, because the legal math of an aircraft actually changes over its lifespan. Yeah, say an owner installs a new avionics suite, or they upgrade the propeller. The empty weight and the center of gravity permanently shift.
Oh, wow.
So the POH contains the specific, legally binding operational limitations, performance charts, and weight and balance data for that single physical machine. Operating outside the parameters defined in that specific POH is a direct violation of federal regulations.
Okay, so we have the universal guidance of the AM, the localized data of the POH, and then bridging the gap between those manuals and the federal laws are advisory circulars, or ACs.
Ah, the ACs.
Yeah, and the numbering convention for these circulars initially looks like bureaucratic alphabet soup, but it actually maps directly back to the structure of the CFRs.
The numbering system is actually highly logical once you see it. Take the example of AC 6165E.
Okay.
The initial number, 61, immediately tells you the subject matter. It links directly to Part 61 of the CFR, indicating this circular deals with certification. The 65 is the sequence number within that specific category.
Right, and I noticed the lettering system at the end, like the E in 6165E. It functions exactly like version control in software development.
Exactly like that.
Every time the FAA updates the standard or clarifies the guidance, the letter bumps up to the next iteration.
Yeah.
So E basically signifies the 5th revision.
Spot on.
But here is the pushback I have, or the question I'd ask if I were a student pilot. If advisory circulars are explicitly informational and not actual regulations, why should a student pilot spend precious study time reading them? Aren't they just suggestions?
That is such a vital concept for a student pilot to grasp. Because yes, the CFR dictates what you are legally required to do. The law might mandate that you, quote, maintain an airworthy aircraft or demonstrate proficiency in a specific maneuver.
Right.
But the legal text rarely explains how to execute those requirements practically. Advisory circulars provide the FAA-approved blueprint for compliance.
So if the law demands compliance, the AC provides the accepted methodology.
Exactly. If you execute a procedure exactly as outlined in an advisory circular, you are shielded by the fact that you're using the FAA's own approved standard. It basically translates dense legal mandates into actionable cockpit procedures.
That makes total sense. Now, books, manuals, and circulars are great for permanent rules, but what happens when a runway closes 5 minutes ago, or the president suddenly decides to fly into your airspace?
Right.
We have to move from static books to dynamic, real-time alerts.
Because the aviation environment is highly fluid. I mean, a crane might be erected near a runway threshold, a navigational beacon could fail, or a sudden security event closes the airspace over a major city.
You definitely cannot wait for a manual to be reprinted to get that data.
Right. The system requires a mechanism for absolute immediate disruption of the normal rules. And that mechanism is the Notice to Airmen, or NOTAM.
NOTAMs. These are the dynamic, need-to-know-now alerts that alter your operational reality in real time. And the scope of issues covered by NOTAMs is just staggering.
It's everything. They track everything from VIP presidential movements and inoperable runway lighting to highly specific environmental hazards.
Like bird TAMs?
Yes, bird
I
TAM.
couldn't believe that was a real thing.
Oh, they are. They're issued when large flocks of migratory birds intersect approach paths. Then you have SNOTAMs, which provide granular data on runway friction degradation due to ice or standing water.
And HAK-CH1s.
Right, tracking the operationally significant spread of volcanic ash clouds, which, by the way, can decimate a jet engine in minutes.
Which is terrifying. So before a pilot even attempts to decipher the text of a NOTAM, they really have to understand the two primary categories, which are NOTAM-D and FDC NOTAMs.
Yeah. NOTAM-D stands for distant dissemination. These deal primarily with the physical and operational status of navigational facilities and public use airports.
So if a taxiway is closed for repaving, or someone is mowing the grass adjacent to an active runway, that's broadcast as NOTAM-D.
Exactly. And they rely heavily on standardized keywords like RWY for runway or TWY for taxiway, just to immediately categorize the hazard.
Then you have the FDC NOTAMs, which are issued by the National Flight Data Center. Now, these actually carry regulatory weight.
They do. If a specific instrument approach procedure needs to be amended due to an obstacle or a temporary flight restriction, a TFR is established over a massive wildfire to keep civilian aircraft away from the firefighting tankers. That gets issued as an FDC NOTAM.
And reading a NOTAM requires a specific cognitive framework because the information is delivered in this highly compressed, raw data format. It essentially strips away all conversational language in favor of absolute density. Reading a NOTAM sounds like the aviation equivalent of checking a crowdsourced traffic app for a sudden pothole, but instead of a nice little icon, you get this raw data string.
And the sequencing of that data is very intentional. You read it strictly from left to right. It almost always begins with an exclamation point to flag the data string. Then it provides the accountability location, the identifier of the facility issuing the alert.
Next is the affected location, pinning down exactly where the hazard exists.
Right. Then you hit the keyword, immediately categorizing the issue, followed by the surface identification, like the specific runway number.
Then comes the condition, which is what is actually broken or closed. And finally, the string ends with the effective time.
And that time format is a massive stumbling block for new pilots.
Oh, yeah. Because it isn't formatted as, Tuesday at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
It is expressed in Universal Time Coordinated UTC, which student pilots are familiar with. But in the NOTAM, it's presented as a dense 10-digit block of numbers.
Just a wall of numbers.
Like, for example, 07080511600.
Yeah.
And I look at that 10-digit time code, and my first thought is, why make it so hostile to read? Why not parse it out to be visually intuitive for a stressed human brain?
Because prioritizing human readability often introduces fatal ambiguity.
Wow. Okay.
When you are managing the safety of the global airspace system, you have to prioritize foolproof data integrity over visual comfort. Those 10 digits follow an uncompromising logic. Year, month, day, hour, and minute.
So the 07 is the year, 08 is the month, 05 is the day, and 1600 is the exact minute in UTC.
Exactly. It strips away all local context.
Right.
It removes the confusion of local time zones, daylight saving shifts, and international datelines. A pilot departing from Tokyo and a student pilot checking weather in Ohio must have the exact same mathematically precise understanding of exactly what minute a runway shuts down.
So by presenting it as a raw, standardized 10-digit block, the FAA forces the pilot to intellectually process the exact time rather than glancing at a potentially ambiguous, localized time format.
Because a misunderstanding of time in aviation isn't just a scheduling conflict. It is an airspace violation or a collision hazard.
So the rigidity of the data is the ultimate safety net.
Exactly.
Wow. We have tracked the architecture of this entire system. We started at the highest level of federal law with the sweeping mandates of CFR Title 14. We moved through the logistical backbone of the FAA's field facilities down to the local enforcement of the FSDO and the aviation safety inspectors.
Yep.
We stepped into the cockpit to examine the specific legal DNA of the POH and the operational blueprints of advisory circulars. And finally, we analyzed the raw, minute-by-minute data stream of NOTAMs.
It is an overwhelming amount of infrastructure, but every regulation, every manual, and every 10-digit time code serves a singular purpose, establishing a standardized, highly predictable environment. You really cannot safely practice the physics of flight if the environment itself is chaotic.
Which brings us right back to where we started. You, sitting in that left seat, hand resting on the throttle, you are no longer blind to the invisible web. You understand the mechanics of the operating system surrounding you. But there's a vital, provocative concept you need to carry into your next flight lesson.
And it directly connects to that paradigm shift we analyzed with the FAASTeam, the evolution away from focusing solely on mechanical failure.
Because the FAA itself is essentially admitted that the easily identifiable mechanical causes of accidents are largely a relic of the past. The stringent regulations of Part 43, the strict adherence to the POH, and the oversight of the ASIs have successfully secured the physical machine.
They really have.
So as you look out through that plexiglass and prepare to introduce power, ask yourself this. If the aircraft itself has been engineered and regulated to near perfection, how are you actively training your own mind to handle the elusive human factors? Because inside this incredibly safe, obsessively structured system, the most unpredictable, highly variable element left in the cockpit is you.
That's it for this episode. Keep your wings level, your brain sharp, and catch you next time in the pattern. Thanks for riding with Propeller Breeze.